Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the very first session of RAHPHC's very first virtual conference. We're really happy to have you here today and to be kicking off the conference with these sessions geared toward Historic District Commission concerns. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this program is for educational purposes only. Members of public bodies, such as HDCs, are reminded not to discuss or act upon a matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So that said, my name is Katie Pomploon. I'm the Grants Coordinator and Certified Local Government Coordinator for RAHPHC. Here with me today is Patrick Hanner, Principal Planner for the City of East Providence, Michael DeLuca, Director of Community Development for the Town of Narragansett, and Keith Lescarbeau, Chair of the Narragansett Historic District Commission. Patrick and Michael are going to present case studies of different approaches to development and expansion of local historic districts in their towns. And Keith is going to speak to sort of the boots on the ground work of the HDC. So if you have questions during the presentation, please submit them using the Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address all questions at the end. And the session is going to end very promptly at 1:50 p.m., but our panelists have generously offered to continue the conversation in another breakout room. So if you'd like to join that room when the session ends, go back to your agenda and click on the link labeled A1 discussion workshop. So with that, I think we're ready to go. And I'm going to toss it over to Patrick to start us off.
Oh, thank you, Katie. And good afternoon to everybody in attendance. And I'm going to share my screen here. So in East Providence, we took like an incremental approach to protecting our city resources. And this is most likely the result by, back in the early 2000s, the city lost several historic prominent historic structures. We lost the Bohm Theater directly across from City Hall, and we also lost several other historic structures dating to like the mid-1800s. And as a result, it was members of the Historical Society and members of the city's Historic Properties Commission. They expressed concern that there was no protection for our historic sites and our structure. So the City Council requested the Planning Department to research what are the tools available for a community to safeguard its structures. And after consulting with the State Preservation Office and other communities, our recommendation to the City Council was that East Providence should adopt state enabling legislation that allows for the creation of a historic district commission, designate certain areas as local historic districts, design guidelines, and a demolition delay ordinance. However, there was a resistance that was from the residents and from the politicians at the time. There just wasn't a political will to designate parts of the areas of the city to be as local historic districts and to be controlled or regulated by the use of design standards. So a compromise was reached. In January 2007, the City Council adopted the state enabling legislation. It allows the city to create to appoint members to a historic district commission, and it also allows the city to designate certain areas as local historic districts with design guidelines and the demolition delay component. However, there just wasn't the political will for this, creating the local historic districts and having design standards implemented. So this was most likely the result was, in East Providence is unique. In East Providence, we don't have a concentration of our historic structures. They're scattered throughout the community. We're not a community like Barrington or Warren or Pawtucket or North Kingstown, where you can find a certain commercial area, a certain residential area with a high concentration. Ours are just scattered throughout the city. And I think this has led to, there's just not a strong appreciation for historic structures in East Providence. So it was decided almost immediately after the council passed the legislation that allowed the city to have design guidelines, to have a historic district commission. it was decided then that we need to increase the public awareness. We had to increase the public awareness of the politicians and the residents that we have historic resources in our city and they need to be protected. So the next step was, how do you go about increasing public awareness and the appreciation of historic structures and sites? Well, since we adopted the state enabling legislation that allowed for the Historic District Commission state enabling legislation, East Providence became eligible to participate in the Certified Local Grant Program that's administered through the State Preservation Office. And this allowed us to undertake several National Register nominations and studies, and several studies. And the whole intent was, let's do the NR nominations, let's do the studies, give the residents the opportunity to learn about our city, about our historic sites, and that we do have historic sites, present in our city. So I'll just go through these briefly here, the past projects. Again, all these projects were funded through the Certified Local Grant Program. And what's important about all these studies, the studies and the NR nominations that we did from 2010, is that every one of them required the consultant to take their findings and present them at a public meeting to give the residents the opportunity to learn of the city, of the sites, and about actually these studies and the NR nomination. So in 2010, we hired the preservation consultant, Kathy Cavanaugh. She did an NR nomination of Phillipsdale. It had around 114 contributing resources. Phillipsdale is like a small working village, mill village, with a dam, a railroad, 75 working housing, 3 former stores, a church, and a former school. This public meeting was very well attended, and by not only the residents of Phillipsdale, the northern part of the city, but also residents throughout the city. And it was a great opportunity to learn about the history of this one particular mill village. In 2013, again using CLG funds, we did a citywide reconnaissance study where we primarily looked at like 3 study areas of the city, around 1,000 properties. And the intent of this study, the purpose of the study, was to determine if any places in the city have a potential to be National Register districts. And this study did conclude that the Elm Tree Plat and the Roseland Park Plat, 2 areas of the city, did have a very high potential for an NR district, for a National Register district. In 2014, we did a condition assessment report, again using CLG funds. And this was a condition assessment report of the Oddfellows Hall. This is a very prominent building in East Providence. This is one of the very first structures that you see as you're entering East Providence on 195 heading eastbound. And this condition assessment report, not only did it identify the existing conditions, but it prioritized all the needed repairs, and it gave us detailed cost estimates. And we shared this study with a number of nonprofit and for-profit developers. And this again had a public meeting to it where the consultant presented their findings. And this presentation was actually presented before the planning board, because the planning board members at the time, not only were they very interested in learning about the history of the building, but they were also very interested in knowing what type of potential reuse that it has. And so that study was extremely helpful for this one structure. And I can say as of today, it is currently under renovation with the intent for either retail or a restaurant on the 1st floor and the 2nd and 3rd floor to be either office or residential. And then in 2015, again using CLG funds, we did the NR nomination of the Elm Tree Plat and the Roseland Park Plat. And the Elm Tree Plat had around 80 contributing resources, and it was described in the NR nomination as being a virtual bungalow museum. This is just a small residential neighborhood consisting of no more than like 3-4 small residential blocks. But you can see every different style of every bungalow, just all there in one little area of the city. And the Roseland Park Plat, that was 55 contributing properties, again in a very small residential neighborhood consisting of no more than like 3 residential blocks. And this one, the Roseland Park Plat, had surprised us too. And again, it had a very high this had a high concentration of English cottages, as well as some Cape Cobs and colonial revivals. And this public meeting was, again, it was highly attended, not only by individuals in those two plats, in those two neighborhoods, but also by residents throughout the city. And again, this was a fantastic opportunity for the residents to learn about our history and about our existing historic sites and properties. In 2015, we, again using CLG funds, we did a mapping study where we identified all the early European settlements from like early 1600s to around mid 1700s. And again, this was presented as a public meeting. The findings of this report was presented to a public meeting. And again, this was very well attended. I think there were residents in this city that did not realize of the pre-colonial sites and colonial sites that we have in this city. So this was also just a fantastic opportunity for residents to learn of the past and the sites that exist today. And we actually have two projects that are currently underway. Again, both of these are funded by the CLG grant program. We just recently hired H2 Design, a preservation consulting fund using CLG funds to complete a citywide interpretive signage plan where we're identifying the historic sites, prioritizing them, and also trying to determine how's the best way to tell the story of these sites. Do we do it through a traditional interpretive sign panel? Do we do a combination of text, photos, maybe QR codes, or should it be all like an online type format? And we also just started a survey of all the city's current and former school buildings located throughout the city. And this is, again, it's funded by the CLG program. And this study here actually came from the suggestion of the State Preservation Office because the city, we just recently lost two 1930, 1940 school buildings. Just within the last 3 months, they were demolished. One being the Williams Water Middle School, and the other being the Arthur Platt Middle School. These two buildings, they had a high potential for reuse. They had a high potential to be placed on the National Register, but there just wasn't a political will for the city to aggressively seek a developer that was willing to rehab the buildings instead of demolition. So this was actually a loss for the city. So the question is, have we made progress? Have we made progress since we adopted the state enabling legislation for the Historic District Commissions back in 2006? And I would say, yes, some progress is made. Major progress, no, but I would say we have made some progress in increasing public awareness of our historic sites. And just recently, as of 2018, the City Council designated the Rumford National Register District, which is in the northern part of the city with 75 contributing properties. They designated the Rumford National Register District as a local historic district. And the council did not pass or allow the Historic District Commission to regulate that one local historic district by the use of design guidelines. But they did allow the component of the state enabling legislation for the demolition delay ordinance to protect those structures. So from 2006 to 2017, yes, progress was made. As of today, we do have a local historic district. The properties are protected through a demolition delay ordinance. However, we do not have any design guidelines in place. As of today, there's just not a political will. But also a major milestone for the city, too, was in 2019. We hosted the 34th Annual State Historic Preservation Conference. This was just a fantastic opportunity for the residents and people throughout the state to learn about East Providence and our historic resources. So these were, I would say, two major milestones. And the question is now, what are our next steps? What can we do to continue to increase this public awareness to the point where there's a political will and a desire from the residents to protect our historic resources? Well, one, we're going to continue the NR nominations, the public workshops, maps, brochures, historic markers, and interpretive signage. We think this is critical. And in the short term, what we plan on doing is designating the recent National Register nomination of Phillipsdale, Roseland Park, and the Elm Tree Plat as local historic districts. And of course, we're going to continue to advocate. We're going to have every conversation we can have with any councilman, with the mayor, with the residents, with the city's boards and commission, that we need design guidelines, established in our local historic district. So Katie, that concludes my presentation. I'll just
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrick.
turn it
That's
back
really
over to
helpful.
you.
All right. So with Patrick's conclusion there, I think we'll toss it over to Michael to give us a look at how Narragansett approached developing their historic districts and expanding them after their original development.
Give me a moment. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Our story is somewhat similar to East Providence's, but we've managed to establish a number of local historic districts and put regulations in place. So I'm going to give you a little history, and then we're going to go through how we established our first locally regulated districts and then what we did to expand them. So let me start by hold on. Okay, here we are. The town of Narragansett created their first historic district commission in 1995. The group attempted to establish a single mega district in the Pier area, but failed as opposition came from numerous quarters. With no designated districts, that group eventually disbanded. In 2006, a situation occurred that made all sit up and take notice. That was the listing for sale by the Diocese of Providence of the Hazard Castle, which was at that time being used as a retreat for the diocese. And this is one of the town's most iconic structures, dating to the late 19th century. Interest in adopting historic district zoning resurfaced with support from the planning board and town council members, as well as numerous members of the public. So staff got to work. We researched over 25 ordinances, 10 of which were from the state of Rhode Island, historic district ordinances, but many from around the country. And we inventoried the structures in the 4 existing National Register districts. Unlike East Providence, we had already had the 4 National Register districts established. I believe that was in 1978. Public workshops ensued in 2007 and 2008. Numerous workshops. Our form of contact of the public was through the Narragansett Times, putting ads in the newspaper, as well as placing notices on the town website. So we had public hearings after the workshops. In the end, we had 4 locally regulated historic districts. So today I'm going to address the key issues that were debated in that 2007-2009 period and contrast them with the key issues that were more recently considered when we completed the expansion of one district, establishment of a new district, all in 2017. So, why do we need local historic district regulations anyway? That was the question that we heard more often than anything in the beginning, in the 2007 early time frame. Why this added layer of bureaucracy? Many stated that the proof was out there to see. There are so many older homes maintained in good condition as inventoried by the staff. So that was testament to the fact that we don't need regulations. But in each workshop, I found myself explaining and trying to convince the public that historic local regulations, the local historic district regulations, really provide an insurance policy that it ensures not only that you do the great work on your property, which you've already said you do, but also that the neighbor across the street exercises the same respect for his or her home as you do. Once into the specifics, the biggest issues to address were based on fear of the unknown and the expectation of delays in receipt of building permits. The staff addressed these issues as noted on this slide here. The fear of style-based decisions was one that came up quite often. And there was the assumption from many people, many members of the public, was that a new historic district commission would just make up their mind as to what they liked and what they didn't like based on their own personal opinions. So we assured the public that this regulated written standards and guidelines would be put in place. The problem of delays for in-kind replacement were raised. What if I just want to replace a door that's falling off the house or reshingle my roof? How long do I have to wait for that? So we considered waiving the hearings in that circumstance. In conclusion, what we had done was the staff had addressed those primary issues noted in the previous slide, and we made amendments. We put in place an administrative review procedure. We first, and then other things we did were that we reduced the size of the districts that were proposed. So there were certain areas where people made, I'd say, moderately convincing arguments that certain blocks or certain groupings of homes should not be regulated. So we reduced those and changed the designation from regulated to voluntary district. Secondly, we documented results of over 50 studies that largely supported two significant points of criticism that we felt we had to push back against. One was cost of repair. And people had assumed the cost of historic repair would be exorbitant. Well, these studies actually showed that cost of repair can often be less than the cost of demolition or partial demolition and then reconstruction from scratch. And the second was that property values would stay the same or potential or even increase. The criticism we had heard at hearing was that people's property values would be reduced by being located in a historic district. But the studies that we uncovered from around the country, from West Coast to East Coast, North to South, all bore out that property values could be maintained and even increase in an historic district. And third, we did something very important. We delayed implementation for a year. This allowed some, those naysayers who could not be convinced, to pull their permits and do the work on the properties that they wanted to do. We look at that as a lost battle, but it helped us to win the war because those people then were not part of our discussion, and they had achieved what they wanted, which is the improvement that they had originally thought they would be doing. But it also allowed us to seat our 7-person historic district commission, 8 counting the alternate, and to draft the standards and guidelines with the assistance of a paid professional historic preservation consultant. And with those guidelines, we went forth 12 months later in initiating and to this day reviewing applications in the 4, now 6 historic districts. So these are the districts that we approved: Central Street, Earls Court, the Towers, and Ocean Road. I'll show them to you. Here's Central Street. And I think you can see my cursor. Yes, this parcel right here I'm identifying is the town hall where I'm sitting right now. Central Street runs down the spine. And you can see we have 2 color codes, 2 colors. And the code is that the area in purple was the original historic National Register district. The area in yellow was the area we wanted to add to that to make one single district. In 2009, when this district was originally approved, the yellow became the voluntary district. The purple became the regulated. Here's the Earls Court district. This is Earls Court. This little island right here has a remnant of a water tower dating back to the 1880s on it. These 4 lots right here possess the 4 structures known as the Sherry cottages, again also built back in the 1880s. But this district, unfortunately, the whole north side of this street had already been rebuilt. Many of those properties there were built in the 70s and 80s. And we lost that entire district to voluntary because the town council didn't have the interest in designating an entire district when what they saw is about half of it was late 20th century structures. This is the Towers District, entirely regulated. And for those of you who've been to our lovely beach, the Narragansett Town Beach is right here. This is the Towers. As you all know, those who have seen it, it spans both sides of Ocean Road. Coast Guard House is right here for those of you who've been down here and been to our restaurants. And this is the Ocean Road District, somewhat further south, outside the pier. And as you can see, it does have a small voluntary non-regulated district. Unfortunately, those were the battles we had to lose in order to win our war. And here is our inventory. So you can see we had in total, we had over 220 parcels. The percentage of contributing was pretty high, except for in the Earls Court district, which I described. And so the number of non-contributing parcels was 52 out of 220. So we had over 150 contributing parcels. So let me move forward. Now we flash forward from 2007, 8, 9 time window to 2016. So here we are, 8 years outside the origination of the Historic District Commission in the 4 regulated districts, as I showed you. And the Historic District Commission members had been talking for some time about areas in town that they felt were easily qualified for designation. They identified the Narragansett Avenue area and the Boone Street area and the area near the Dunes Club. In addition, they felt that Central Street, Ocean Road, and the Earls Court districts also could be expanded. So we drafted the mapping for that, as you see, and we also conducted public workshops. Oops, I'm sorry. So workshops first. During this period, we contacted property owners directly instead of just using newspaper notification and the website itself. We sent letters to every single property in the districts that we were projecting. There was a larger turnout than during the 2007 and 8 workshops. And it was apparent to us that the public was much more aware of the regulations this time around. And one point that was not made was fear of reduced property values. But some of the same issues did arise. Mostly fear of denials and also just dislike of the added layer of bureaucracy. And then, of course, while many argued about the specifics of the district boundaries, they didn't argue as vociferously. And we actually heard a lot of complimentary comments about the Historic District Commission, its track record, the value of preserving older structures. But in the end, we still heard, not in my neighborhood. So these are not uncommon sorts of responses. Notable differences since 2008 to 2016. In 2016, the public was better attuned to the existence of the regulations and the existence of the Historic District Commission. Most appreciated the preservation objective. And the HDC had expanded the administrative review option. We had established an administrative review option in 2008 for simple things like residing, but they expanded that and granted more authority to the staff. And also, while this was all going on, the Historic District Commission was advancing an idea to provide for tax credits for the larger projects that would be approved through their process. In summary, there really are just a few things that come out of this that I'd like to highlight. One is that it is much more difficult to initiate historic district zoning than it is to expand. When you're expanding, if you've done your job, if you've been the steward of the historic properties in town, the inventory you have, and you've done it with a certain amount of light-handedness, it's appreciated and it shows, and the public comes out in support. Second was that growing pains can lead to advantageous amendments, meaning we learned about how much we could do administratively so that we could shorten the amount of time that reviews take. And we learned that a tax credit opportunity was available, and there's enabling law at the state level that allows for it. You can actually turn your opponents into proponents. And in the end, the track record of the HDC really stood out as a key factor. And this goes to Mr. Lescarbeau, who's going to speak next, all the members of our Historic District Commission who served over the years. And the fact that they were willing to work with applicants, not to just bring the hammer down of our 78 guidelines that we had on the books, but to try to understand the needs and the desires of each individual applicant. So with that, I will segue to Keith to put a little more of a personal face on this the progress we've made over the time that we've been in existence.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank Katie and Julie and everyone and Rita and everyone that worked on putting this program together. It's great to see things that promote the awareness of this effort. Antoinette Downing and I would talk of these things as we served on the SWAP board together, and I maintained her home on Power Street over 40 years ago. So it's great to see such things come to fruition. Obviously, HDC is very important, obvious to us. Demolitions and inappropriate modifications are irreversible. So it's important that we have these type of ordinances to protect our properties. So how do you do it? Basically, it's first of all, you have to start with a great team. You know, and everyone has to be fully involved. You need a great council and local leaders. You need a great superhero planning and staff. In our instance, planning put all this data together that you've heard about in our town. We were fortunate to have a great planning department that was able to compile all the statistics and data you need to basically bring your case to the public. And you need members of the community. You need architects, concerned homeowners, preservationists, all have to come together in a full effort. So, you know, once you've in many towns, I think there are many of these ingredients, but they just haven't come together enough. So fortunately, in Narragansett, after a long period of time, the parties came together and the effort was unified. And so first, you know, you've got your team. Now you need to start with your data. You need your ammunition. You need your information to educate the parties involved, the powers to be, the decision makers. You have to present information to them that makes them aware of what's going on. So again, planning, put all that together. You need to know where your resources are. Where are the concentrations? Where are the conserving properties? As Mike mentioned, we have up to 80-something% of historic, older than 60-year-old homes, contributing properties in small concentrations. So that was advantageous for us. You can't take this on with a shotgun approach. So you need to establish those concentrations. You need to establish the locations. You need to date all the properties, identify the inventory, and have your descriptions of what they are: Queen Anne's, Victorians, Greek revivals, Italian age, whatever they might be. You need to have all of that information before you can go to your public. Okay, so now you've got all your information. You know the ages of the properties, the concentrations. This will give you an idea of where to go in your town for your areas of districting. So now you need to bring in the public. You need to inform. So we had a series of workshops And this is where you get your homeowners to come in. So now you've got your data, you have your facts and figures. You can talk to the public and give them the information they need to either support or not support once they've heard the full argument. And this is where you are able to alleviate fears, okay, and fears of the unknown. You know, there are a lot of people that aren't familiar with what's going on with the movement, that they don't know. They think maybe you're going to make them match the aggregate in their mortar and the lime cement ratio for PSI properties, and the species of their lumber, and you're going to make them, you know, fabricate and mill everything with no electricity. All of these things go through people's head that haven't been there and done that. So this gives you a chance, one-on-one. People come in. I mean, there were people in our workshops that thought we were going to go through the districts and make everyone take off their vinyl siding if they already had it. They were going to have to get a loan and take out a mortgage and remove their vinyl. There were people that thought that we had to do the work, you know, and you would come in and they would pay you to do. So there are all these misconceptions, and the workshops give you this opportunity one-on-one with people to say, hey, no, that's not it. You know, this is what it is. And basically, you can let them know we have a fair set of guidelines, very specific, without any case decisions. These are the specifics of what you want to do. And basically, it's, if you have clapboard, put clapboard back. If you have shingle, put shingle back. If you have 6-inch corner boards, you put 6-inch corner boards. If you have 6/6 buttons and configuration on your windows, you put 6/6 back. And if you want to do new windows and doors, that's fine. If they're bad, you just have to match their configuration and their location. It's just basically boils down to fix it like it is. That's really all we're asking. And if you want to do an addition, that's fine. You know, but obviously you can't do a 3,000 square foot addition on a 2,000 square foot house across the front of the house. So yeah, we keep it in proportion. We put it to the side. You know, we have to be sensitive to all these issues. And the higher the need of the function, be it need of space, handicap access, business needs, we have to be sensitive. We have to be supportive. We have to be assistive in what we do. So that's your chance at the workshops to alleviate the fears and give them the facts and the reality of how really workable everything is. Once that's done, now we go to the public hearings. This is where it starts to heat up. This is where the real adversaries come out and the war is on, right? And basically, this is where people will come in that are serious adversaries, that are organized, they're ready to deal. So you've got to be ready as well. To their disadvantage, they can't come in and say, hey, we want to have the option of demolition. We want to be able to demo and put something in a different shape that's better for our personal current needs. So they have to tiptoe as well. So there's a difficult hurdle for them. They're going to come in and say it's more expensive, it's more trouble, it's more hoops to jump through, it's detrimental to the values of the neighborhood. They're going to say all these things, but you know, there are so many studies, and you really don't even need studies. All you've got to do is, you know, if you haven't been out of state to Philly or Virginia or Maryland, all you got to do is stay local and ride down Benefit Street, ride through Newport, ride through Bristol. It's so obvious how the districts are good for a community. It's so obvious how they look after a while, and particularly in our town, the properties look better. Everything gets better with districts. So this is where that case is presented, and it's also what the council needs, and you have to go in there This is where you present your track record for expansion, okay? And this is where, for us, fortunately, after 8 years of existence before our desire to expand, we had people coming in very enthusiastic. Of over 100 applications, we had not one person that come in and complained about the process. To the contrary, they were raving about the process, coming in, how easy it was, how their project turned out cheaper, better, more appropriate as a result of working with the commission. So, and also, we were assistive all along the way. We have a house doctor consultant program. Anyone in Narragansett can call with a problem, a leak, a settling issue, something that's been bothering them for a while, and we'll show up on site and tell them how to deal with that. So we're very supportive to our applicants, and that reads in their feedback at the public hearings. Very important. Another important thing, I think, is when you go in with your districts, you've applied all the data, you're going in with your districts, you have to have wiggle room, okay? Because prior to the public hearings, the powers to be it your mayor or your council, they're getting a barrage from both sides prior to the public hearings. So they have to go in there with they have to rule with the sympathetic ear. Okay, so you have to have some wiggle room where you can maybe sacrifice a district, sacrifice some numbers in different districts. So you've got to be sensitive to that. And you know, we have our tax credit where in our town where you get directly off your taxes, you get a credit for 10% of your project, up to $50,000. So that's $10,000 on a 20% of your project, up to $50,000. It's $10,000 credit on your taxes. So that, I mean, that's hard to argue with, but I think it's important to note that you know, this whole thing is really about the community, for the community, from the community, and it's hard, I think, for the adversaries to argument a minor inconvenience, you know, a short delay and a couple of hoops, a minor inconvenience, how that would outweigh the greater good for the community. So that, you know, we, down the line, we save, if you went into that meeting and said, hey, do whatever you want with 94% of the town, I think they wouldn't look at you as crazy as if we're going in saying, hey, let's save 6% of the town. Okay, so that's important, and we don't want our grandchildren to look at skeleton towers with solar beacons on them and think that's how a lighthouse always looked. We don't want them to look at, you know, one-dimensional architecture and think that's the way it always was. So it's really important that we save the most important stuff as much as we can, a small amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. All right, everybody, so time is short. I'm going to open it up to Q&A, but I just also want to that we do have sort of a workshop set up for additional Q&A when this session ends. It's going to cut us off at 1:50, but if you want to continue the conversation with Michael and Keith and Patrick, please go back to your agenda at 1:50 and click the session name that says A1 parentheses discussion workshop. So just looking at the chat here, I have a question. Someone is asking if we can explain the difference between a voluntary district and a regulated district. And I think, Michael, that speaks back to your maps there.
Sure. I knew that would come up because it takes a lot of time to explain, but and I didn't want to get into it too deep in the presentation. But it's an idea that was brought up, I believe, in Pawtucket and Warren prior to Narragansett. We adopted the idea and we implemented it slightly differently. It really is exactly what the word says. It's a voluntary district. So as you recall, I had put a couple of districts up there that were colored in yellow. And what that said was we were identifying it as an historic district, but that the regulations did not apply, were not mandated. the applicant, any property owner that was in those locations, in those districts, could come to the Historic District Commission for advice and receive a certificate of appropriateness, or just verbal advice, whatever level they would want. But we did hold out in the ordinance that should anyone come in in a voluntary district for full approval, they could qualify to apply for the tax credit. And at the time we wrote the ordinance, we didn't even have the tax credit in place. That took us a few years to get in place, and we did put it finally. We did finally adopt one about three years ago. So so now, if you're in a voluntary district and you apply and you go all the way through the process, you can qualify to apply for the tax credit.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so I'm just looking back here through. I have another question. Trying to figure out what it says here. Let's see. So someone said, what happens when NR districts are used against property owners, as has been the case in Newport? Does this mean districts will be harder to implement in the future? And then there's some discussion back and forth about local versus national. I'm trying to make a little bit of sense of this. I believe the Newport district reference here is a National Register district, not a local historic district. But I can't speak specifically to Newport myself.
Yeah, I don't know if that's for Patrick or for me.
Well, I could talk about the difference between a National Register and a local historic district. But a National Register district is just pretty much just the recognition at the on the National Register, which is overseen by the National Park Service. And there's very little protections for a National Register property. In fact, the only protections that for a National Register property is if the homeowner or the individual, the owner is, or the developer is using federal funds. If there's really no federal funds involved, then there's absolutely no way for a city board or a city commission or a municipality to even comment on that property. But the actual protections for historic sites and structures, it comes down to the local historic district ordinance. You know, that's where a municipality, it's at the municipal level, it's at the town and city level, and that allows a town or a city to designate an area as a local historic district, and then then they can have their design guidelines where they can prevent certain types of sightings, the certain type of actually the siting of a building, where Keith had mentioned earlier, you know, to have an expansion or an addition placed to the rear of the structure instead of the front of the structure, things like that. So the protection of the structures, when it comes down to municipalities, it's really at it's the local historic district ordinance and not the National Register.
Thanks, Patrick.
Totally.
Another question here in the Q&A. How do you protect any significant trees in the local historic district? Specimen trees, are they included?
They can be. They can be. In fact, in Narragansett, the site I mentioned earlier, the Hazard Castle, has a historic landscape that was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, and the landscape itself is dominated by numerous beech trees, 120-year-old, 130-year-old beech trees. So when you have documentation of a landscape, then you can regulate it. If it's just a pretty tree or a pretty bush, but it's not really documented, that's a tougher thing to be able to protect with the local regulations.
Awesome. This might be our last question before we get kicked off, and it's kind of a big one, so it might also go into the next workshop. But I have someone asking, would you be able to share some of the resources you found on the cost of repairs within historic districts versus standard costs? So this concern about cost increases for property owners is one I've heard many times at community meetings and would love to be able to offer a more informed answer.
I think we can do that. You know, as I said, I've got a file of 50 studies that we've done, and some of them get detailed. Some of them are not very detailed, but and they date back a little bit. They're not totally up to date, so the numbers are a little bit dated. But be happy to share that. And if that person wants to come on the post discussion later, we could chat a little longer.
Perfect. All right. With that, it is 150. So I want to say a huge thank you to Michael, Patrick, and Keith for speaking for us today. It's been a really great session, and I really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed, and will continue to enjoy 2 more days of conference content.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.